Welcome, dear friends, to a tale of redemption, love, and second chances. Enjoy the story. Sarah Thompson had only just started her night shift at Oakwood Memorial Hospital's morgue when the wail of an ambulance siren pierced the air. What followed was a sight she never expected to see: a procession of wedding cars trailing behind the emergency vehicle. "What in the world?" Sarah muttered, stepping out into the warm summer night. The rest of the morgue staff poured out onto the sidewalk, their curiosity piqued by the unusual spectacle. Sarah hung back, acutely aware of the sideways glances thrown her way. She was the newest addition to the team, and her background was the subject of much whispered speculation. "Ex-con," she heard one of the older technicians mutter. "Lord knows what she did to end up here." Sarah's cheeks burned with shame, but she held her head high. They didn't know her story, and she wasn't about to volunteer the information. As the ambulance doors swung open, Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The paramedics were unloading a gurney, and on it lay a young woman in a wedding gown, her veil still intact, cascading over the side of the stretcher. Behind the gurney, a man in a disheveled tuxedo stumbled forward, his face a mask of anguish. "Emily," he cried out, reaching for the bride's lifeless hand. "Oh God, Emily, please wake up." Sarah's heart ached for the grieving groom. She knew all too well the pain of losing someone you loved. As the commotion died down and the staff returned to their duties, Sarah found herself alone in the cold, sterile hallway of the morgue. She leaned against the wall, closing her eyes as memories of her past came flooding back. 5 years ago, Sarah had been a different person. Trapped in an abusive marriage, she'd endured countless beatings at the hands of her husband, Mark. With no family to turn to and nowhere to go, she'd suffered in silence for over a year. Until that fateful night when something inside her snapped. Mark had come home drunk as usual, spoiling for a fight. But this time, when he raised his fist, Sarah fought back. In the struggle that ensued, she'd grabbed a kitchen knife and plunged it into his chest. The trial had been a media circus. Mark's family painted Sarah as a cold-blooded killer, while her public defender argued for self-defense. In the end, the judge, a stern-faced woman with steely gray hair, had looked Sarah in the eye and said, "The world's a better place without men like your husband, but the law is the law." 7 years, reduced to 5 with good behavior. Sarah had walked out of prison 3 months ago, determined to rebuild her life. But with her criminal record, job opportunities were scarce. The morgue had been a last resort, and to her surprise, they'd hired her on the spot. "Beggars can't be choosers," the hospital administrator had said with a shrug. "Besides, you've already proven you can handle dead bodies." The macabre joke had made Sarah flinch, but she'd taken the job gratefully. Now, as she watched the bride's body being wheeled into the examination room, she couldn't help but wonder about the story behind this tragic wedding day. Hours passed, and Sarah went about her duties, mopping floors and sanitizing surfaces. As she worked, she overheard snippets of conversation among the staff. "Can you believe it?" one of the technicians whispered. "Poisoned at her own wedding?" "By her maid of honor, no less," another added. "Guess she couldn't stand to see her ex-boyfriend marry someone else." Sarah's hand tightened on her mop handle. What a senseless tragedy, she thought, to have your life cut short on what should have been the happiest day of your life. As her shift neared its end, Sarah stepped outside for some fresh air. That's when she noticed a figure huddled on a bench near the morgue entrance. It was the groom, his head in his hands, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Against her better judgment, Sarah approached him. "Excuse me," she said softly. "Is there anything I can do to help?" The man looked up, his eyes red-rimmed and vacant. "Can you bring her back to life?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Sarah's heart broke for him. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I wish I could." "I can't leave her," he said, his gaze drifting back to the morgue. "I don't know how to live without her." Sarah recognized the depths of despair in his voice. She'd been there herself in those dark days after Mark's death, when the weight of what she'd done had threatened to crush her. "I know it feels impossible right now," she said gently, "but you have to hold on. Emily wouldn't want you to give up." The man's eyes snapped back to her face. "How do you know her name?" Sarah faltered. I I overheard the paramedics," she lied quickly. "Listen, you shouldn't be alone right now. Is there someone I can call for you?" He shook his head. "I'm not leaving her," he repeated stubbornly. Sarah sighed, knowing there was nothing more she could do. "Just take care of yourself, okay? Emily would want that." As she turned to go back inside, the man's voice stopped her. "Wait, what's your name?" "Sarah," she replied, offering a small smile. "I'm Jason," he said. "Thank you, Sarah, for caring." Sarah's mind was troubled as she finished her rounds that night. She couldn't shake the image of Jason, alone and broken on that bench. As she entered the examination room where Emily's body lay, she paused, struck by how peaceful the young bride looked. "Such a waste," Sarah murmured, reaching out to adjust the sheet covering Emily. That's when she felt it, a warmth that shouldn't have been there. Frowning, Sarah placed her hand on Emily's arm. It was soft, pliable, and unmistakably warm. "Oh my God," Sarah gasped, her heart racing. She grabbed a small mirror from her cleaning cart and held it over Emily's mouth. To her astonishment, a faint fog appeared on the glass. "She's breathing!" Sarah cried out, her voice echoing in the empty room. "Help! Somebody help!" The next few minutes were a blur of activity. Dr. Peterson, the night shift pathologist, came running, followed by Jake, a young medical student who worked part-time at the morgue. "It's impossible," Dr. Peterson muttered as he listened to Emily's chest with his stethoscope. "But I'll be damned if I don't hear a heartbeat." Jake sprang into action, calling for an ambulance while Dr. Peterson began emergency procedures to stabilize Emily. Sarah's mind was reeling. How was this possible? Then she remembered. Jason was still outside. Without a word, she bolted from the room, racing through the corridors and out into the night. "Jason!" she called out, spotting him still slumped on the bench. "Jason, come quick! It's Emily! She's alive!" Jason's head snapped up, disbelief etched across his features. "What? No, it can't be!" Just then, the ambulance Sarah had seen arrive hours earlier came screaming back to life, its sirens wailing as it prepared to transport Emily to the ICU. Jason stumbled to his feet, his eyes wide with shock and hope. "Emily?" he whispered, watching as the paramedics wheeled her out. "Oh God, Emily!" He raced to her side, grasping her hand as the paramedics loaded her into the ambulance. "I'm here, baby," he choked out. "I'm right here." As the ambulance doors closed and it sped away, Sarah found herself trembling with the magnitude of what had just happened. She'd helped save a life that, by all accounts, should have been lost. "Life for a life," she murmured to herself, thinking of Mark. Maybe this was her chance at redemption. Word of the miracle bride spread through the hospital like wildfire. Sarah found herself at the center of attention for the first time since she'd started working at the morgue. People who had previously avoided her were now approaching her, eager to hear her account of that fateful night. Jake, the medical student, seemed particularly interested. "You know," he said one evening as they were finishing up their shift, "what you did was pretty incredible, Sarah. You've got good instincts." Sarah felt her cheeks warm at the compliment. "I just did what anyone would have done," she demurred. Jake shook his head. "No, not anyone. Most people would have assumed she was gone and left her there. You noticed something was off and you acted on it. That's special." As the days passed, Sarah found herself spending more and more time with Jake. He was kind, intelligent, and didn't seem to care about her past. For the first time in years, Sarah felt herself beginning to hope for something more. But not everyone was as accepting as Jake. Sarah still caught whispers and suspicious glances from some of the other staff members. "Ex-con working in a morgue," she overheard one nurse say. "Seems fitting, doesn't it? She's already got experience with dead bodies." The cruel words stung, but Sarah held her head high. She knew she couldn't change her past, but she was determined to build a better future. 2 weeks after the miraculous revival, Sarah was surprised to see a familiar face at the morgue entrance. It was Emily, the bride who had narrowly escaped death, accompanied by her husband Jason. "We've been looking for you," Emily said, her face glowing with health and happiness. "We wanted to thank you properly for what you did." Sarah felt a lump form in her throat. I didn't do anything special, she stammered. Jason shook his head firmly. You saved my wife's life. You gave us a second chance at happiness. That's everything. As they talked, Sarah learned the full story of what had happened on Emily and Jason's wedding day. The maid of honor, a woman named Melissa, had been Jason's ex-girlfriend. Unable to accept that he had moved on, she had slipped a powerful sedative into Emily's champagne, intending to humiliate her. She didn't mean to nearly kill me, Emily explained, but she underestimated the dosage. If it hadn't been for the quick thinking of you and the medical team here, I wouldn't be standing here today. Sarah was touched by their gratitude, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she didn't deserve it. After all, wasn't she just as guilty as Melissa? Hadn't she taken a life too? As if reading her thoughts, Jason spoke up. Sarah, we know about your past, he said gently. Emily's father is a detective. He looked into you after we learned your name. Sarah felt her heart sink. This was it. The moment when they would recoil from her, disgusted by what she had done. But to her surprise, Emily reached out and took her hand. We don't judge you, she said softly. We all have pasts. We all have regrets. What matters is what we do with our second chances. Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes. For so long, she had carried the weight of her actions alone. To have someone, a stranger no less, offer understanding and forgiveness was overwhelming. Thank you, Sarah whispered, her voice choked with emotion. You have no idea what that means to me. In the weeks that followed, Sarah's life underwent a dramatic transformation. Inspired by her role in saving Emily's life, she decided to enroll in night classes to become a paramedic. Jake supported her decision wholeheartedly, offering to tutor her in anatomy and physiology. Their study sessions soon turned into dinner dates, and before long, Sarah found herself falling deeply in love. But the shadows of her past still lingered, making her hesitant to fully open her heart. One evening, as they sat in a cozy Italian restaurant, Jake reached across the table and took her hand. Sarah, he said, his voice serious, I need to tell you something. Sarah's heart raced. Was this the moment he'd tell her he couldn't be with someone with her history? I love you, Jake said simply. All of you. Your past, your present, and whatever future we might have together. I don't care what anyone else thinks or says. You're the most incredible woman I've ever met. Tears sprang to Sarah's eyes. Jake, I love you too. But are you sure? My past, it's always going to be there. People will talk. Jake squeezed her hand. Let them talk. I know who you are, Sarah. You're strong, you're compassionate, and you deserve every happiness. I want to be the one to give it to you, if you'll let me. In that moment, Sarah made a decision. She was done letting her past define her. She was ready to embrace the future, with all its uncertainties and possibilities. Yes, she whispered, a smile breaking across her face. Yes to all of it. 1 year to the day after Emily's near-death experience, Sarah found herself standing in a sun-drenched garden, surrounded by friends both old and new. She smoothed down the front of her white dress, still hardly able to believe this day had come. Emily, resplendent in a bridesmaid's gown, approached with a radiant smile. Are you ready? She asked, adjusting Sarah's veil. Sarah took a deep breath, nodding. I think so. I never thought I'd be here, you know. Getting a second chance at love, at life. Emily hugged her tightly. You deserve it, Sarah. You've earned this happiness. As the music began to play, Sarah took her father's arm, a man she had reconnected with after years of estrangement, thanks to Jake's encouragement. They began their walk down the aisle, towards Jake, who stood waiting with tears in his eyes and love radiating from his smile. Sarah's gaze swept over the assembled guests. There was Jason, holding Emily's hand, Dr. Peterson and the morgue staff, who had become like family. Even a few of her old prison mates who had turned their lives around, just as she had. This, Sarah realized, was what redemption looked like. Not a single moment of heroism, but a life lived with purpose, surrounded by love and second chances. As she reached Jake and took his hands in hers, Sarah felt the last vestiges of her past fall away. Here, in this moment, she was not an ex-con or a woman with a troubled history. She was simply Sarah, loved, forgiven, and ready to begin her new life. "I do," she said clearly, her voice ringing with joy and certainty. And as Jake leaned in to seal their vows with a kiss, Sarah knew that her greatest adventure was just beginning.